Hi everyone, it's Miss Rossi. Today we are going to make a still life inspired by artist Paul Cezanne. What you'll be needing today is your still life paper from your art folder. This is just a plain white piece of paper, so if you do not have this one, any other white paper will work. I'm going to take my label off because I won't be needing that. We are also going to need a pencil and something to trace and color with. I have crayons that I'm going to use to trace and add color. I also have some watercolors that I'm going to use to fill in my background, but you can use whatever material you have at home to add color. If you want to use all crayons, if you want to use crayons and markers, colored pencils, or anything else, it is up to you. Now today we got to learn about Paul Cezanne and his still life paintings. Today we are going to make our own still life. So that is a drawing of a collection of objects that are still or not moving. Usually artists will draw still lifes of flowers or bowls of fruit. I'm going to start by turning my paper horizontally so it is longest going left to right. This is going to give me much more space to lay out my picture. I'm going to be drawing some apples in my still life today because Paul Cezanne loved drawing fruit, especially apples. So with my pencil, I'm going to start by drawing 3 apples on my paper. Now, when we are looking at his artwork, we noticed that all of his fruit that he was drawing were in different positions and facing different directions. So we're going to try and do that as we are creating our own still life today. We also saw that our apples and our different pieces of fruit are not perfectly round or perfectly one shape. Like, even though we know an apple is mostly like an oval shape, it is not a perfect oval. So as I'm drawing, I'm going to start by drawing my first apple. It is going to be a nice big round shape, not a perfect oval, not a perfect circle, kind of something in the middle. Once I have that on there, I'm going to draw a second apple. This one is going to be behind my first apple. To make it look like it is behind my first apple, I'm going to draw the shape coming out from the side. Now this apple can be bigger, it can be smaller. Its shape can be a little bit lumpier or bumpier or a little bit different. It is up to you. Once you have your first 2 apples on there, you can decide where you want your next apple to go. The only place it can't go is above the 2 we already drew. We don't want to draw our third apple all the way up here on the top of our page because then it's going to be floating in space once we end up drawing our table. I think I'm going to draw mine down here in the corner. If you want, you can have your apple touching your other 2 apples, or you can make it on its own like mine. So I have 3 apples on my paper. Right now they are just round blobs, but we are going to turn them into apples. The first thing I'm going to do is add some stems. Now wherever you draw your stem is going to show what direction your apple is facing. So I am going to start with this one. I want this stem to be facing up towards the top of my page. I'm going to draw a small curved line like a smile, and then another curved line coming out to make my stem. So we have the little indent where our stem is coming out of, and then we have our stem actually curving out from the top of our apple. So now my apple looks like it's kind of leaning on its side a little bit. Maybe with this apple, I want my stem to be facing down towards this way so it looks like it's fully laying on its side. So to do that, I will draw my little smile curve facing the direction I want it to go, and then have my stem shape coming out from there. And now maybe with my last apple, I want it to be laying down so the stem is facing me. So right in the center, I'm going to draw that smile shape, and then I can have my stem coming out from there. So now it looks like all of our apples are facing different directions. The next thing I'm going to do is draw a table on my paper, because right now our apples are floating in space, and we don't want them floating, we want them sitting on a table. So from one side of my paper, I'm going to draw a straight line. It's going to hit the side of my apples, jump over them to the other side, and connect to the other edge of my paper. Now you want them to be kind of in the same general area, so if it looks like they're not going to match up, you can always erase and fix it a little bit. We just want to make sure that we're not drawing through our apples. Our apples are not see-through, so we want to make sure our table is behind it by going over to the other side. Now that I have my apples on there and they are all done, I have my table and I have my background wall, I can add a nice design to my table and my wall. On my table, I think I'm going to do some stripes. You can draw whatever kind of design you would like to decorate your table and to decorate your wall. It does not have to look like mine. I'm just going to do some repeating lines for some stripes on my table, and I'm going to make sure I pick a different design for my wall. I don't want the same design on both because then it's going to get a little confusing and you won't be able to tell where the table ends and the wall begins. I think I'm going to do some zigzag lines on my wall because those will be nice and different than my straight lines. Your design doesn't have to just be lines. You can add some shapes in there if you would like. Maybe you want to draw a picture on your wall. Maybe your wall has a window that's looking outside. It is up to you. I think I'm even going to add some shapes in here. I'm going to draw some circles inside my zigzags. I'm making sure my design is going all the way to the edge of my page. And even as I'm drawing this design in the background, I'm making sure that I am not drawing over my apples. Now that I'm done sketching my still life, I'm going to pick some crayons to use to trace. I'm going to grab a black crayon to trace my apples. So with my black crayon, I'm just going to go right over the top of all of my pencil lines. I'm even going to trace the little smile shape and my stem. So I'm going to do this on all of my apples. And now to make my background a little bit different, I'm going to use some different colors to trace my background details. So maybe I'm going to trace my lines on my table with a green crayon, and maybe I will trace my wall details with a blue crayon. You can pick whatever colors you would like, whatever you think is going to look best for your design. But then with that, we're just going to trace right over all of our pencil lines. I'm also going to trace and even color in those dots that I have on my wall. Now that everything is traced, it is time to color in my apples. I am going to pull out a red, an orange, a yellow, and a green colored crayon because I'm going to start to blend some colors together as I color in my apples. Now when we looked at Cezanne's artwork, we saw that he was blending together his different colored paints to create shadows and highlights and realistic looking apples. So we're going to try and do the same thing. When you want something to be realistic looking, it's best to add things like shadows and highlights. Shadows are the darker areas of a picture where the light is being blocked. So if I hold my hand up on my paper, you can see the shadow that is cast from my hand. You can see the areas of my hand that aren't lit up by the light are a little bit darker than the areas where the light is hitting it. The areas where the light is hitting something is always lighter and brighter, and that is called a highlight. So when you add a highlight and a shadow together, it helps make something look more three-dimensional, like it takes up space and it is round. So we are going to do that with our apples today. So with my yellow crayon, that is my lightest, it's going to be used for my highlights. I'm going to pick areas where I think the light is going to be hitting my object. Now normally this is like the top of your object and your shadow would be around the bottom. So I'm going to color in the top of this apple with a little bit of yellow. I'm going to go nice and lightly. And now I want my colors to get darker as they get closer to our shadow, which is going to be down here along the bottom. So I'm going to go to my next darkest color. My orange is a little bit darker than my yellow. So I can add my orange around the yellow and fill in that middle area. Our orange is like our middle color. So that's going to fill in that middle section. And now I said our shadow is going to go along the bottom, and I'm going to use our red for our shadow. And with my red crayon, I'm just going to color that in all along the bottom and bring it up to meet our orange. And we want to press lightly with our crayons because then we can layer more and more colors on top of each other. And as I'm coloring with my red crayon, I am coloring very lightly over the top of my orange and even over the top of some of my yellow to help blend my colors together. Now the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that yellow crayon again and I am just going to color over the whole thing, and that's going to help mix my colors together, and it's going to brighten up all of my colors as it fills in all of those little white spaces that were left. And since my yellow is a nice light color, I can still see the orange and the red that is underneath, even though I am coloring over the top of it. There we go. You can decide if you want certain areas to be darker or lighter. You can always go back in with your darker colors like your red and your orange and blend those back on top if you want your apple to be a little bit darker. I also like to put a little bit of my darker color around the stem because that is a little bit sunken in on our apple. The stem is always growing out from that center point, so I like to put a darker color in there too. So that is my first apple all done. I think I want this apple to be a green apple. Now even with our green, I'm going to start with that yellow and I'm going to decide where I want my highlight to be. Now this apple is laying on its side, so the shadow is going to be down here closer to the table, and our highlight is going to be up along the top. So I'm going to take my yellow and color that in all along the top. And then I'm going to take a light green. This one's like a greenish yellow. And I am going to go from my yellow and fill in that little middle section. So this light green is acting like our orange was before. So it is like our medium tone before we get to our super dark shadow color. And then I have a darker green for last that I'm going to use as my shadow color. So I'm doing this along the bottom where my apple is closest to the table. And I'm going to add a little bit extra around my stem. And then just like I did with my other one, I'm going to take my yellow and color right over the top of all of my colors here to help blend them together a little bit. And my apple's looking pretty yellow, so I'm just going to add some extra green very lightly over the top. There we go. And then I think I'm going to make that last apple another red one. So I am going to start with my yellow crayon again, and I'm going to decide where I think the light is hitting it. I think my light is going to be hitting my apple up here along the top. So I'm going to color that in yellow. I'm going to move on to my orange next. So we are just getting a little bit darker. And my red, which is going to go fill in the rest along the bottom where our shadow is. There we go. Now that I'm done coloring my apples in, I can put my crayons away because the last thing we are going to do is fill in all of the rest of our white space here with our watercolor. So I'm just going to use my watercolor paints to fill in the rest of my table and my wall in the background. If you don't have watercolors at home, you can fill in the rest with whatever color crayons you would like. It is up to you. As I'm using my watercolor, I made sure to wet my paintbrush. I wiped the extra water off on the side of the cup, and now I can fill in all of the white space. As you're adding your watercolor to your paper, wherever you added crayon is going to resist your watercolor, so you should still be able to see all of those beautiful crayon details that we outlined, and you'll be able to see your apples. So even though I'm painting close to my apples, it is okay if I get a little bit of watercolor on top of them because it will resist. So I'm just going to use my watercolors to fill in the rest of my picture. I'm going to make sure that I do my table a different color than my wall, because again, we don't want those to blend together. We want them to look a little different. Now that I'm going to switch to a new color, I'm making sure to wash my paintbrush really well so I don't mix my colors together in my tray. And then I can fill in the top half of my picture. And there you have it. That is my Paul Cezanne inspired apple still life all finished. Once you're done with your project, you can upload a photo or video of it on my Canvas page. I can't wait to see the colorful apples you guys have created. Try your best, have fun, and get creative, and I'll see you soon. Bye!